Continuing our reading in No Frills Science Fiction, today is Chapter 8. If they went back, they could be almost certain of defeat. The library planet was too large, too complex, to yield its secret to a handful of adventurers. If they continued on, their mission seemed certainly lost, and perhaps their lives as well, among the stars. Their conference ended, unresolved and depressing. Tentatively, they decided to wait while Poppy and the professor investigated the ship more thoroughly. Despite his seat-of-the-pants success in getting the ship off the ground, Alex had no real idea how the vessel flew. "I'd guess we're being powered by the Grobham-Fisher effect," the professor posited. "It hasn't quite been worked out yet on Earth, but the theory is sound and it would account for our odd Doppler shift." Though familiar with the culture that had built the ship eons before, the bot was no more help. "Whatever powers this thing," it observed. "Our main task is to discover how to steer it." "And where?" Dana interjected. The newly formed crew settled down to a steady routine of sleep and ship's chores. There was much of the former and little of the latter. It was difficult caring for a vessel no one understood. Alex worried unceasingly about his father, the missing colonists, and their failure on the library planet. Dana suffered the same pangs. Also, her stomach was growling. Not since the robot world had they had a square meal. The professor, though, was in his element. Like a small boy, just learning the alarm clocks and toasters came apart. He was toying, fiddling, exclaiming with delight over the inner workings of the spaceship. The bot was ever at his side, the perfect assistant, knowing no hunger. The second morning out, the professor broke in on Alex and Dana, muttering excitedly. Any interruption of their endless games of tic-tac-toe was welcome, and they made a space for him on the control room floor. "I've got it!" Carberry exclaimed with some pride. "Got what?" Dana asked. "I've discovered how to operate the drive. We can go anywhere we want." "You mean back to Earth?" Alex corrected. The professor gave him a concerted look and repeated himself. "I said anywhere we want. The unit's incredible. A complete history and library of coordinates in a chip the size of your thumb. I've set a course for Croatan." Alex sat up. "It had a listing for Croatan?" "That's right," Carberry replied. "A star system with 4 significant planetary bodies, 2 gas giants, 2 that could be Earth-like. That's all we know until we get there, sometime tomorrow night." Alex looked at Dana with new light in his eye and new animation in his face. Sitting by her side on the steel cabin floor, he reached out and hugged her to his side. The professor looked on approvingly as he quietly let himself out of the cabin. Alex murmured, "I love you, Dana. I think I have from the start." She whispered back, "Me too." Leaning forward, Alex offered her a kiss. Then they scrambled for their seats at the control board. "We should be approaching the Croatan system now," Carberry observed, returning with Poppy. 3 faces and the robot's orbs strained to catch sight of their destination in the deep black beyond the viewport. "There it is!" Dana exclaimed as a bright jewel of the sun swung into view. She reached out and grabbed Alex's hand in her excitement. Quickly, the sun grew in size. Automatically, a polarized visor slid over the port. With the glare reduced, Alex was able to spy the first of the gas giants. No life there, he thought to himself. At least no Earth-type life. With incredible speed, they swung wide through the alien system. Calculating their trajectory, the professor determined that their goal was the second planet. It was still invisible to the naked eye, but the ship's instruments registered its presence. The other gas giant passed into view, and at that moment, almost imperceptibly, the ship shuddered as the drive was extinguished. Conventional piloting would have delivered them to their destination. Alex took the controls. He planned to place the ship in orbit around the second planet and search for a likely landing area. As he began maneuvering, a warning siren filled the control room. Alex searched the board, but nothing seemed to miss. It was Dana who located the source of the trouble. Over the keening siren, she yelled to Alex, "Interceptors!" Through the port, Alex caught sight of the ugly, needle-nosed missiles straining in their direction. They could only have been launched from the second planet, he realized. "Dina, grab the controls!" In a moment, he was across the control room, grappling a heavy protector cover off the small control panel. He flicked a switch, and the panel glowed with brilliant light. Their ship was armed. Gritting his teeth, Alex maneuvered the joystick until he caught the missiles on his scope. Wincing once, he got off a burst of laser fire. Over his shoulder, he called back to Dana, "Hold steady until I give the order, then dive straight onto them." As he pressed off bursts of energy light, Alex's feet beat a staccato rhythm on the ship's steel flooring. One, then two of the approaching missiles exploded violently without a sound in space. Two of the others were thrown off course and reeled away toward the sun. 4 to go, Alex thought grimly. Now! Braced as he was, the sudden change in direction was still violent. Alex hung in a sweat from his harness, intent on the astro sights. The missiles were close now, very close. He squeezed off a volley that should catch them just beyond the ship's safety perimeter. If any should get through... The thought remained unfinished as space erupted into a volcanic nuclear fury. Dana managed to skirt the fireball, but the tiny craft was battered and tossed like a matchstick in the shock waves. In her last moments of consciousness, Dana slapped the ship on course for the second planet. Alex watched the last of the missiles consume itself. Then he too succumbed to the darkness. They were headed into their enemy's backyard, whether they liked it or not. Waking was brutal. Worse, Alex thought, than the battle itself. With dismay, he realized that the throbbing hum of the engines was silenced. The steady purr of the ship's respiratory system was gone. Either their craft was derelict or... He jumped to the port and gazed out incredibly over a vast arena, crowded with people and other beings. Dana woke and stood beside him, dazed. In the bowels of the ship, he could hear the bot reviving the professor. Steeling himself and gripping Dana's hand for support, Alex turned from the port and went to greet the new arrivals. The airlock was cycling. Whatever he was expecting, it wasn't what walked through the lock. Beside him, Dana clung to his shoulder in astonishment. All three were humanoid, but none ran to Earth norm. One had no face, simply a sticky-looking flap of skin where its features should be. Alex guessed it obtained nourishment by some sort of parasitic osmosis, but how did it see, hear, or smell? Another was less revolting, but no less inhuman. It looked feline, but that may have been its shocking pink coloration. The features were in the right order, but they had a strange mottled look, as though they were sculpted on. The third was horsey, with a long equine face and slimy buck teeth. None wore any clothing. It was the horse that spoke first. "Commander Harrison?" So they could talk. Good. Alex began by denying the title. "But you are in command." The horse sounded puzzled. When Alex replied, "Sort of," the horse continued with more assurance. "Welcome to the Council of the Thousand Species. You have been spared to join others of your species now on trial in the arena." "On trial?" "Assuredly. Now, if your companions are ready, we will proceed." The horse sounded most urbane as he gestured to the open portal behind him. Carberry and the bot had emerged to hear the end of the alien's edict. The professor's jaw hung open. The horse stamped its lower left extremity. A half-dozen smaller versions of his species rushed inside and made short work of hustling the humans out. The robot was something of a puzzle. but the three aliens conferred privately for a moment and included him in the roundup. The airlock cycled behind them. They were on the surface of Croatan. They were ushered out of the arena and into a compound fitted out for humans. Abandoned there, they stood in the tight huddle until Dana observed a large structure in one corner of the paddock. Alex observed wryly that on Croatan, humans and livestock seemed to have switched places. It was a humbling thought. Slowly, the foursome made their way across the compound. As they neared the structure, the sound of humans were unmistakable. With quickened stride, they nearly fell over one another, trying to reach the door and get inside. Inside, the babble was tremendous. Rows of crude tables filled with food accompanied the motliest crew of human beings any of them had ever seen. Still, these were humans, and something in all their heart lifted as they watched the commotion. From a far corner, a voice cried, "Alex? Alex Harrison?" In a moment, the three humans and their robot companion were ushered to a table and surrounded by excited friends and acquaintances from Pluto. The colonists seemed eager to tell their stories. "Rounded up like cattle," one said. Another complained, "No warning, no explanation, just shoved through that darn portal teleporter thing." A woman interrupted, "Perhaps it would have been better if we told our story from the beginning." Hearing no objection, she began, "It was during night shift that we were attacked. We were gassed, most of us in our sleep. By the time we began coming to, half of us had already been teleported here. The other half stood by helplessly while they watched the base destroyed. It was a grisly sight, believe me. I overheard our captors mention Croatan. It was the only clue I could hear. I concealed a laser pistol and burned a message into the rock where the base had stood. After that, we were all delivered here. This council has access to a time machine of some sort, and humans are gathered in this room from periods all throughout history. Virginia Dare, the Roanoke colony, the crew of the Marie Celeste, pilots missing from the so-called Devil's Triangle, the crew of an ancient Greek trading vessel, 100 others, but no one, you understand, from a time or place in our future. We seem to be the end of the line for some reason." "Why are we here?" asked Dana. "The council, evidently ruling body of our galaxy, fears us. Our progress has been too swift. Humanity's on trial here today. Your father, Alex, and a few others are now pleading mankind's case." "My father?" Alex cried. "He's alive?" "Oh, I'm sorry. You couldn't have known, could you? Yes, your father was delivered here by the Admiral Haig, a kind of interstellar infiltrator. He's a member of an alien species that bears enough resemblance to humans to pass. Though I understand you had your doubts." She reflected. In any case, that's the story in a nutshell. On your father's persuasiveness, humanity lives or dies tomorrow. For the moment, all of us guinea pigs are here have chosen to eat, drink, and be merry. The woman's words stirred in Alex an incredible complexity of emotion. Mankind might die tomorrow, but his relief at hearing that his father was alive today was unbounded. He inquired quickly how he could get to see his dad. "It can't be done," the woman replied. "Not until the whole thing is over." Dana, clinging to Alex's shoulder, could feel his heart beating. The gleam in his eye had prepared her when he turned his mouth to her ear and whispered, "Get the others together somewhere outside and quietly." Without a word, Dana complied. She'd learned to trust in Alex's judgment. A few minutes later, the little group was assembled in a far corner of the yard. Alex issued his instructions clearly and calmly. "Poppy," he started, "we need one more teleportation from you. That's all I'm asking. Professor, I'm going to need your cooperation. We're going to beam right into the council chamber. Before we leave, Poppy will drop you over the wall. I want you to make your way back to our ship and get her warmed up. We're going to break out of here and take as many of these people as possible. But first, I have to get my father. Dana's coming with me." The professor nodded and looked pleased to be able to help. In a few moments, Poppy and Alex had worked out the council chamber's coordinates from what he had learned from the woman. With a last searching look into both their eyes, Alex saw that the professor and Dana were ready. Carberry shook hands with Alex and clasped Dana briefly to his narrow chest. Then he stepped back and grasped the robot tightly. In a few moments, the two were airborne and over the wall. A few short seconds later, the bot was back. It reported that the professor was on his way. Poppy began whirring noisily. Lurching, it managed to call out, "Hang on tight," and was off. The universe dropped away, and Alex and Dana fell through the sky. That's the end of chapter 8.